Tonight, we're going to continue with the book In Love with the World by Mingyur Rinpoche. And in this chapter, I thought before go into it that I would give a little background here. So I got on the internet and I looked up the Varanasi train station, and it's a very large train station. I'm not sure how large, but I would say huge. And it's a relatively modern building in India architectural style. And so then we're going to be talking about the Ghats there in Varanasi. So again, I did a little research there and I found some pictures. There's lots of pictures because it's very picturesque. And much of it was built in the 17th century, 18th century, but it has been a holy site for Hindus before the Buddha was born. And it is a sacred or holy site for Buddhists as well, and also for the Jain religion. And so it brings a huge amount of people there on pilgrimage. And also when I have flown to Gaya, the flight then stops at Varanasi. And I will always have people of European descent, whether it be from America, Australia, or Europe, that'll be on the flight that are going to Varanasi for whatever reason. So it attracts huge numbers of people from all over the world. But here was a little bit of information that I got from Wikipedia that I found quite interesting. And that is that the peak of the Mughal Empire in India, they ruled India for centuries. But their peak was during the reign of a king, Arun, Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb is the best I can do for pronouncing it. But this is what Wikipedia said, that at that time, that India was worth over 25% of the global GDP, gross domestic product, the amount of goods produced, and that it had a population of between 110 million and 150 million people. And at that time, that would have been a quarter of the world's population. So when these buildings were built, they came from a time that was more prosperous than the present India. So I'm going to begin now with chapter 12. It is Mingyur Rinpoche's third day at the Varanasi railway station. And as I said, he is going to go to the Ghats, which is by the river. And people go there for all kinds of reasons, to bathe in the Ganges, which is the most sacred river in Hinduism. They go there to die, to be cremated, for purification. And so there's just all kinds of activity going on the banks of the river and then actually in the river. He talks about having during a previous trip, actually getting in a boat and going out in the river and doing various activities. So what the Ghats consist of are steps, very steep steps. And he says there's a series of 79 steps, not 79 steps, but 79 collections of steps. And again, this has been here for millennia. And not only do you have the crowds of people, you also will have cows, you'll have monkeys, you will have all kinds of different smells coming because these streets were going to be narrow. They're going to be full of shops and food stands and just all kinds of things going on. It's going to be very chaotic. So he has a 5-mile walk to get from the bus station or the train station to the river. And at a normal walking pace, you can cover 5 miles in just under 2 hours. But he was doing more than just walking. And so this gave him lots of time. And he talks about different kinds of meditation he did as he was walking. And the first one was a walking meditation, which is just paying attention to the motion of the feet as you are walking. And when your mind wanders with thoughts and so forth, just come back to the feet. After doing that for a while, he switched to awareness meditation, of awareness of the thoughts and the impressions that arose in his mind as he was walking. Instead of coming back to the feet with his concentration, he then just let his awareness focus on what was arising in his mind, but not grasping on it, so that the thoughts would come and the thoughts would go. Then he talks about the memory of his last visit to the Ghats. And in brackets, he had in various places in this section, lifting, moving, placing. That meaning that not only is he aware of his memory of the last visit, but that he is aware of the feet moving. And on this last visit, he, of course, was a Rinpoche, and he stayed in a 4-star hotel. Someone else paid for it. He did various spiritual things there at the river and on the river, and then returned to the hotel. And as he said, had fresh fruits, curd, croissants, and lattes. And somebody else paid for all of that. He said this seemed like a different lifetime. Then he reflected on Noshul Rinpoche, who had done a wandering retreat in his lifetime. Yeah, it was Noshul Ken Rinpoche. Ken is short for Kenpo, and that means that he had a degree that would be comparable to a PhD in this country, a degree of Tibetan Buddhist studies. So he said that everything about Noshul Ken Rinpoche inspired him. and that the wandering retreat that No-Shelken Rinpoche had done had inspired him partially to encourage him to do this retreat. So on his way there, he stops at a shop and buys some cloth so that he can dress like a sadhu when he decides to stop wearing robes. But he admits that he's not ready yet. And basically, the cloth is just wrapped around you loosely. It keeps you covered, but it's very simple clothing. So he goes down some of the steps, stops at a tea shop, orders some tea, relaxes, and returns to the station. That was as far as he got. But then now he starts discussing the aspects of retreat, which is there's an outer aspect, an inner aspect, and a secret aspect. And this, of course, is for our benefit, because this all applies to any time we practice, and it could even apply to setting up a shrine room in your house for practicing or meditating. So the outer aspect is the physical environment that ultimately you want to be unaffected by your surroundings. You could say that would be one of the goals of this wandering retreat, is to be able to practice no matter where you were and no matter how chaotic your surroundings are. On the other hand, you have to be aware of what you can accept and work with. Quote, "What's necessary is a willingness to know the depths of your own mind." And he said he hasn't quite reached that point yet. And he, that evening, goes up to the dorm again for the last time. So it's, in our case, it's a matter of realizing what we can work skillfully and what we can't. And then, always wanting to be able to meditate in more chaotic situations at home, having a quiet shrine room where we are undisturbed is very important. The next aspect of a retreat is the inner retreat. And this is creating an environment that protects us from the ordinary patterns of gossip and slander. And he says also from substances that obscure the mind. That could be anything from alcohol to various legal or illegal drugs. It could be from household situations in which patterns, in his words, of indolence or impatience are formed. And for this reason, sometimes, especially for intermediate and beginners, the best place to do a retreat is not in your house, it's somewhere else. Because it can bring up these all kinds of patterns that are associated with the home. Needless to say, an important part of many retreats is staying off the internet and TV and other things that can disturb our mind and bring up all kinds of conflicting thoughts and emotions. He says, observe the precepts. And it depends upon what kind of your retreat you're doing, what the precepts are. For those of you that have done a Yongey at my center, you know that there are 4 main precepts and 4 supporting precepts. And these help us let go of these inner tendencies that can cause us to, you might say, go off track or not make the best of our retreat. So he says, become sensitized to tendencies that lead to grasping rather than letting go. Confessing and purification are a very important aspect of retreat. And he says, letting go of inner attachment is more important than letting go of objects of attachment, which is outer. And he says, but I'm still wearing robes. He feels they gives him protection. The third aspect is the secret aspect of retreat, and this is intention. And he said that he is doing retreat to, quote, more fully develop my capacity to introduce others to knowing their own wisdom and their own capacities for a peaceful life. That's on page 104. And he feels that in the 21st century, personal transformation is the most important part of what he would like to impart to his students, to the world. And again, on page 104, he says, I have taken vows my entire life to help liberate sentient beings from self-centered suffering and to introduce them to their own wisdom. So this is why he is doing retreat, to be more effective at liberating sentient beings, introducing them to their own wisdom. And finally, he finishes up this section on the secret retreat, is that this is what is needed most, connecting with your own wisdom, seeing how you create your own suffering. So he says that it's extremely important to travel deep inside and learn anything of value that you can about yourself and living in the world. It's interesting that he says that, because it might seem at first glance that doing a wandering retreat throughout India might seem like it has nothing to do with living in the world, even though you might say it has everything to do with living in the world. But he is not encouraging people to escape from the world permanently. He is not escaping from the world permanently. He's going deeper into his own mind and habitual patterns and so forth, so that he can become more valuable to others. So on the way back to the station, he contemplates low-level dissatisfaction among human beings. And he uses a very common American phrase. I don't know if it's common in Canada, but it is, the grass is greener. That our orientation as human beings, and actually as a sentient being, because animals are the same way, is moving from dissatisfaction to happiness. On the other hand, he feels this is an indication of our basic goodness. And it's with us just like awareness. But in our confusion, we don't really see this properly and use it properly. So it's important for us to realize that we have this basic goodness, this Buddha nature. And that just because we're not aware of it doesn't mean that it is not there. So he finishes out this section by saying that loving kindness and compassion are the natural expressions of awareness. Next is a discussion of the in-betweenness or the gap. And there are many times in life that we have this ground beneath us fall away. And he lists a few of his experiences just since he left the Tirgar Monastery in Gaia. And that he says, quote, "We can seize the unbidden opportunity to explore this new mental territory of non-defined spaciousness that is actually always there." In other words, we have constant opportunities to, instead of going back to the usual, to go towards this spaciousness that is always there, this potential. So he responds that his responses so far since leaving Tirgar has been that he keeps trying to reconstruct Mingyur Rinpoche as rapidly as he can. But he says we can train to recognize this gap, and it's really an important training to engage in. He says opportunities to recognize it are things like sneezing, being startled, tripping and falling, seeing a wild animal, getting a life-threatening medical diagnosis. That with all of these, the mind stops for a moment. That there is this flash of naked awareness. He says we die into deathless awareness. The we, of course, is being this idea of ourselves, a fabricated ego. So he says, as we pay attention to our everyday mind, we start to see this happening. You start to see the fabricated self dies for a moment. So he finishes up this chapter by discussing what's left when the fabricated self falls away. On page 109, he says, if we can connect with any aspect of reality that is beyond the normal limits of thinking, mind, then we must ask where this reality comes from and how it came into existence. So he is saying that we have to let go of fixed mind and our ideas about what is real. That letting go is an example of dying. That we get glimpses of many deaths all the time if we look. The things are constantly ending because of impermanence. Things are constantly ending. And this also gives us a glimpse of emptiness. And although this is happening all the time, he finishes up by saying the only real benefit comes from the recognition of this. If it happens and you don't recognize it, then there is no benefit. He is now back at the train station dorm. He has prepared for the day to die and he's eager to be reborn in the morning. He's still wearing his monk clothes. So that finishes chapter 12. Chapter 13 is of sleep and dreams. And I have been listening to the KTD webcast of a autobiography of Karma Chagme. And they finished the outer biography, and now they're discussing the inner biography. The outer biography is what is visible to other ordinary beings of a master's life. The inner biography is what he is experiencing that only other realized beings would be aware of. And in listening to that, it brought me back to this book of Mingyur Rinpoche's, because in a way it is an outer biography combined with an inner biography in places, where he's talking about what's going on inside his mind. The purpose of a biography, an autobiography that a master writes, is to inspire others, to give others confidence in the teachings, as well as confidence in the teacher. But it's meant to develop faith, trust, and confidence. The importance of this is that if we have doubt and mistrust, we can't really progress on the path. It will hamper. It will keep us, not only hamper our progress, but it'll keep us from progressing. Doubt is an incredibly powerful obstacle. And so we need to read these biographies and stories and contemplate them, the teachings that these teachers gave and what they did with their lives and so forth, and help us develop faith and trust then in other teachers, and especially the teachings. So to get on to the chapter itself, he discusses sleep meditation in this chapter, as well as dreams. So now he's in the dorm and he's preparing to go to sleep. And this is what he does this evening, this particular evening in the dorm. He does a head to toe body scan, which he has talked about in previous chapters. It can take a long time as you slowly go through every little part of your physical body and find places that are tight and relax those places. Something else that has, as I have prepared these teachings, become more obvious to me is how much he spends talking about his body and the relationship to mind and body, that usually the body is not given such prominence in Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhism. But he really talks a lot about how tight he is in various parts of his body, how he does body stands and finds these tight places and relaxes them, and so on and so forth. So after that, he places his mind on his five senses as he is going to sleep. And what happens is that gradually the senses fade and dissolve as sleep approaches. And he says this is parallel and very similar to the process that happens when you physically die, as the senses dissolve. Then he discusses dreams. And he says dreams are simply projections of our own mind. That the beings in the bardo, the peaceful and wrathful deities, are projections of our own mind. They are not independent of our mind. And these projections are without, quote, the controls or manipulations we impose during the day. That's on 111. So these are freer, more fluid projections. Continuing to talk about recognizing the disillusion process that gets you to the dream state. He says it takes a lot of practice and an extraordinarily sensitive mind to recognize this disillusion process. He then talks a little bit about the 16th Karmapa, who was able to maintain a pure, non-dualistic awareness throughout his day and during his sleep, but he lost the awareness briefly when he was transitioning from awake state to sleep state. What's interesting about this is that Mingyur Rinpoche felt this was exceptional for the 16th Karmapa, and the 16th Karmapa actually called in another great practitioner to ask him, how can I maintain this awareness as I am falling asleep, because of this one brief period that I lose it before I fall asleep and then have my awareness back. And the practitioners said that what he had done was a great accomplishment, and he did prostrations to the Karmapa because he couldn't help. I kind of take that to mean that even somebody as great as the Karmapa is not able to maintain this type of awareness. At least the 16th Karmapa was not able to maintain this type of awareness 24/7 without exception. That Karmapa obviously felt his meditation, his awareness was not perfect since he had gone to somebody else for help. And that's a good lesson for us, is don't expect to be perfect. So Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche recounts learning sleep meditation. And he says the best time to practice is when you're sleepy during a regular meditation session. That if you're sleepy already, that's a great time then to practice maintaining awareness of what's going on with your five senses. And one quote in this section did bring a smile to my face. Here is the quote. And it is about practicing sleep meditation when you were in the shrine room. Quote, during one of those indescribably long, boring ceremonies. So even he felt that some of these very long ceremonies were perhaps a little too long and were boring. So now he's back talking about his experience in the dorm room. He has a dream that evening of being crushed by a boulder while he was walking back to his hometown. And it completely, in my words, freaked him out. And after he woke up, he had to convince himself that it was an irrational fear. That it really is not something that happened. So then he gets back to teaching us on dreams. And he says that we feel dreams are not real, even though they arise from our mind. But they arise from our mind. They are our creation. And that the dream images he described as being insubstantial, filmy, translucent, mirage-like. And out of our control, but inside our mind. And so he said that this means the self can manifest, the self can manifest as anything and everything, even things beyond our conception. And then the state between dreaming and conventional daytime existence, he compared that to the bardo of becoming. That the unfamiliar of the dreams produces anxiety and fear, and that pushes us towards the familiar and away from the dream. And the familiar, of course, appears to us as solid and lasting. He describes it as running away from fear towards comfort of the familiar. And so what we are running away from when we have a frightening, terrifying, uncomfortable dream is what is produced by our own mind, by ourselves. And that running away does not produce happiness. And he goes back to Nagasena, the monk, who the king questioned about who he is. And in this case, Mingyur Rinpoche thought kind of out loud here that he is not his blood, but who is bleeding, referring to in the dream, he was crushed by a boulder and bleeding. So he goes on to say the value of awareness while dreaming is very important. And also it's fine to analyze dreams, and even more what's going on when you are dreaming, not necessarily the content. It's much easier to recognize emptiness in dreams because things aren't as substantial. They're constantly changing. He uses the word daytime phenomena appear to be denser than dreams. And what came to mind was slogan 6 of the 7 points of mind training, which is, in post-meditation, be a child of illusion. So now we get to the end of this chapter, and he goes to sleep knowing that he will not be in the dorm again. And he describes that feeling as one of uncertainty and both frightening and thrilling at the same time.